Hi. Almost all of us human beings have in us a natural impulse to help others. It's an aspect of being made in the image and likeness of God, I think. We really don't like to see people suffer because we have this built-in instinct for compassion, if you will. And of course, it's usually the strongest when it comes to helping the people closest to us. For example, parents will sacrifice a lot to help their children. Now, even though this desire to help is instinctual, it doesn't mean we automatically do things that are actually helpful to others. To be helpful, it takes more than simply acting on instinct or impulse. Our desire to help others is a piece of the puzzle of who we are. And sometimes it's a challenge to fit it into our lives in a way that bears fruit. Now, sometimes it's pretty obvious when someone needs help and what they need. For example, if I see someone drowning, it's obvious that they need something to keep them from going under. I can jump in to save them if I'm able, or throw them a flotation device, or call for help, or whatever. But often it's not that obvious what might be helpful to a person in a particular situation. That's when it becomes more of a challenge to figure out what to do to help. And that's when we're liable to do something to help that isn't really that helpful. Now, something that some people do in the name of helping others is to do nothing and leave the person in trouble to figure it out on their own. With this type of view, you'll hear things like, "Well, I learned how to do it without anyone's help, so should others." Or, "People need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps instead of whining for help." Or, "They'll never learn anything if they get bailed out all the time." Of course, there's some truth to these sayings, but this approach is only helpful in situations where a person in trouble is actually able to do something that will solve their problem. You wouldn't take this approach with someone who's drowning, for example, and has no ability to deal with the problem. Now, this philosophy of helping others is built on the premise that, number one, we know everything about this life situation of the person in trouble, and two, we know everything about their abilities or disabilities, psychological, physical, emotional, whatever, to solve their problems. That is, unfortunately, an assumption that is often made while people are, quote, drowning in some way, and it's not helpful to them. Adopting this attitude of, quote, helping is also often a thinly veiled excuse for inaction and selfishness. Now, some of us go to the opposite extreme as we try to help others, which is in the same way unhelpful. With this approach, a person tries to help by trying to solve the problem for the person in trouble. The helper sees the person in trouble as being helpless and in need of the helper to take charge and make everything better. Now, people with this view will often say things like, "Oh, you poor dear, let me do it." Or, "I can't stand to see you struggle, so I'll take over." Or, "You're just too weak, or disadvantaged, or incapable, or handicapped, etc. I'll help." Now, this approach is helpful only when it's certain that the person in trouble really doesn't have any wherewithal to manage the problem, like the drowning person. But as mentioned before, the, quote, too much helper often assumes they know exactly what the other person is dealing with and what they're capable of doing or not capable of doing. And they end up doing something that's not very helpful. This can lead to situations of codependency and subtle devaluing of another person's right to run their own life. And often it serves to bolster a conscious or unconscious sense of egotistical superiority on the part of the helper. Now, if we want to be truly helpful to each other, we need to make it a team effort. There's no way a person can know everything about another person's life situation and their abilities, and therefore know exactly what would be helpful to that person. Instead of automatically assuming what the person in trouble needs, like money or tough love or information or independence or punishment or a listening ear, whatever, it's better to let the person explain what exactly their situation is and what would be helpful. In this type of dialogue, the helper and the person in need of help can, together, look at all the options and get a better idea of what would actually be helpful. The old saying still applies here. Two heads are better than one. Now, this dynamic also promotes an equal relationship between people, instead of promoting a relationship where one person is superior, the helper, and the other is inferior, the person being helped. Solving problems this way actually blurs the line between helper and helpee, because the two become one force in solving the problem. Now, we live in a get-her-done society, and we want to solve problems quickly and easily. We're also very opinionated, and we avoid admitting that we don't know it all, like we'd avoid the plague. So that's why putting in the time and effort to discern what would be truly helpful to others, as I described before, often doesn't happen. That's also why some of our most persistent societal problems never get solved, because people in power, who see themselves as the helpers, hand down their solutions, quote, solutions, to the problems without the input of the people needing help. And so the problems persist. No one is completely powerless, lacking any ability whatsoever to deal with their problems. And no one is completely powerful and all-knowing, having all the answers and the wherewithal to solve the problems. It's only in working together that we can effectively help each other with the many challenges of life.